Right now, stop what you're doing. What I'm about to tell you really happened last Tuesday afternoon at Hyde Park Corner in London. 17 different smartphones recorded it, it was streamed live on social media, and now there is a parliamentary inquiry into it that is shaking the very foundations of British law enforcement. In front of hundreds of horrified witnesses, 2 Metropolitan Police officers shot a King's Guard horse in broad daylight. What happened next changed British policing forever. Everyone who saw this scene will never forget it. A beautiful black horse, one of the most important animals in the British royal household, lay still on the cold pavement of Hyde Park Corner, with blood pooling under his strong shoulder. Next to him, a King's Guard soldier was still partially trapped under his fallen partner. His famous bearskin hat was 15 feet away, and his hands were zip-tied behind his back as he tried to reach his wounded horse. The sound of sirens wailing through the air in London, tourists screaming in many languages, and the deafening silence that follows when something horrible has just happened in one of the most watched places in the world. They killed Sovereign. They really did shoot Sovereign. But in that split second when everything went horribly wrong, those 2 police officers had no idea what was going on. The horse they had just shot wasn't just any horse. This was Sovereign, a 12-year-old purebred Shire who stood 6 feet tall at the shoulder and weighed 1,800 pounds of pure muscle and nobility. This beautiful animal had been in 15 royal ceremonies, stood still in the rain at state funerals while world leaders paid their respects, and carried members of the royal family through crowds of millions during Jubilee celebrations. The royal household chose Sovereign from more than 200 horses and trained him for 3 years just so he could wear the ceremonial tack of His Majesty's forces. And the man they had just arrested with too much force, putting a knee on his neck while he bled from his own wounds. Trooper James Mitchell, who was 28 years old, was one of only 12 soldiers in the whole British Army chosen to be in the King's Guard Mounted Division. Mitchell was chosen from more than 800 applicants and had to go through 18 months of the toughest military training in history. He had also dedicated 6 years of his life to serving the Crown and country with a level of discipline and honour that most people couldn't even imagine. Sovereign and Mitchell together were a living symbol of everything that makes Britain great. They were a part of 400 years of British history that had never been broken. They had ridden together through state events that presidents and prime ministers would kill to go to. They had kept their cool under pressure that would break normal people and animals, and everyone who knew what real service looked like respected them. But none of that mattered to Police Constable Thompson on this Tuesday afternoon. Before I tell you how 2 trained police officers turned a normal afternoon into a national disaster, I need you to know something important about what you're about to hear. This isn't just a story about a soldier and a horse. This story is about what happens when people in charge forget that respect can't be demanded, it has to be earned through understanding. It's also about what happens when people make snap decisions instead of thinking things through. Now, please leave a comment below and tell me if you've ever seen a King's Guard horse up close. Most people don't know how smart and beautiful these animals really are. And don't forget to subscribe now, because what happens next in this story will change the way you think about justice, tradition, and the bad things that can happen when you act on assumptions instead of facts. It was 2:30 in the afternoon on what should have been a normal Tuesday in London when disaster struck. Trooper Mitchell was leading Sovereign down the same path they had taken hundreds of times before, from Horse Guards Parade back to Wellington Barracks. But today was not the same. There had been reports today of a suspicious person with a possible weapon near Apsley House, and the Metropolitan Police were on high alert for anything that seemed out of the ordinary. PC Thompson and Sergeant Derek Walsh were not happy to see a man in a military dress uniform riding a huge black horse and carrying a ceremonial sword. Now that you know what really happened that Tuesday afternoon, I need to take you back exactly 45 minutes before Sovereign hit the ground bleeding. You will soon learn that this whole disaster could have been avoided if two police officers had only taken 30 seconds to look at what was right in front of them instead of jumping to the worst possible conclusions. Trooper James Mitchell led Sovereign along their usual route from Horse Guards Parade to Wellington Barracks at exactly 2:30 in the afternoon at Hyde Park Corner. For over 200 years, generations of King's Guard had taken this same path. They had taken it together hundreds of times before. Mitchell sat perfectly straight in the saddle, his red tunic spotless, and his ceremonial sword strapped to his side just like the rules said it should be. Sovereign walked with the controlled grace of a horse that had been trained to do everything perfectly. Each hoofbeat was measured and exact on the London pavement. But today was different in ways that neither Mitchell nor Sovereign could have predicted. Earlier that morning, a confused American tourist called the Metropolitan Police emergency line to report seeing a suspicious person with what he thought was a weapon near Apsley House. The tourist, who was overwhelmed by his first trip to London and had no idea about British military customs, said he saw a man in strange military clothing riding a huge black horse and carrying what looked like a sword. The man was going toward Buckingham Palace. Anyone who knows London would know right away that this was a King's Guard coming back from ceremonial duties. The call had been recorded as a possible security threat, so the Metropolitan Police were now on high alert for anything that seemed strange. Sadly, to two officers who had never worked the Westminster beat before, a man in a military dress uniform riding a huge black horse and carrying a ceremonial sword was definitely not normal. 6 weeks before this, Police Constable Thompson had moved from South London to Central London for his new job. Thompson was 25 years old, ambitious, and eager to prove himself. He also had a huge chip on his shoulder about what he saw as the privileged elite who ruled Central London. His family was working class and lived in Croydon. His father lost his factory job when it was moved overseas, and his mother worked double shifts as a cleaner just to put food on the table. Thompson thought that anyone in a fancy uniform was everything he hated about British class society. More dangerously, Thompson had a personal history with the military that made him see everyone in uniform in a bad light. His older brother had fought in Afghanistan and come home with severe PTSD. The Ministry of Defence had never given him the help he needed. 3 years ago, Thompson's brother killed himself, and Thompson blamed not only the system but also anyone who had military authority. He thought of them all as parts of a machine that chewed up poor kids and spit them out broken. That afternoon, Thompson's partner, Sergeant Derek Walsh, was a different kind of dangerous. Walsh was 47 years old and had worked for the Metropolitan Police for 24 years. But those years had been very hard on him. He had been on duty during the terrorist attacks on July 7, 2005, and had seen things that no one should ever see. He had a very bad case of PTSD that the department had never properly dealt with. Walsh had learned to deal with things by being very aware of anything that seemed even a little bit threatening. Over the years, his idea of what was threatening had grown to include almost anything he didn't understand right away. Walsh was especially suspicious of what he called military types, whom he saw as cowboys who thought they were above the law. He thought that soldiers were trained killers who couldn't be trusted in civilian settings, and he thought that anyone who carried a weapon in public was a threat until proven otherwise. Walsh had never bothered to learn or understand that ceremonial guards carried ceremonial weapons as part of their official duties. As Mitchell and Sovereign got closer to Hyde Park Corner, Sovereign's ears started to twitch in a way that Mitchell recognized right away. This beautiful animal was smarter than most people could understand. It could read people's emotions and intentions thanks to years of training and service. Sovereign could sense hostility from hundreds of yards away, could feel tension in crowds before it turned into violence, and could tell when people were in danger by small changes in their body language and energy. Sovereign could tell that something was wrong in the air around Hyde Park Corner today. His strong muscles tensed a little under Mitchell's seat, his breathing became more controlled and alert, and his huge head turned a little to follow two people who were moving with purpose in their direction. These weren't the slow, easy movements of tourists or the fast, busy movements of people going to work. These were the slow, careful movements of predators who had found their prey. Mitchell could feel the change in his horse right away because he and his horse had been together for years. He carefully moved his seat, put a calming hand on Sovereign's neck, and whispered the quiet words of comfort that had helped them both get through many tough times. But even as he tried to calm his horse, Mitchell noticed that two police officers were walking straight toward them with looks on their faces that made it clear this wasn't going to be a friendly meeting. PC Thompson saw them first, and what he saw confirmed everything he thought about how the military and the upper classes think they are better than everyone else. This rich kid in a fancy red uniform was probably riding around London on a horse that cost more than Thompson made in 5 years. He had a sword like he was a knight from the Middle Ages. The sight brought back all of Thompson's anger about how his brother was treated by military bureaucrats, all of his anger about how rich people could play dress-up while working people struggled to make ends meet, and all of his resentment about class differences in Britain. Sergeant Walsh saw the scene in a completely different way, but it was just as scary. He saw a big man on a big animal, and they were both moving with military precision toward one of London's most sensitive security areas. The man was holding what looked like a weapon, was high up where he could see everyone on the ground, and was controlling an animal that could easily be used as a weapon against people or property. In Walsh's paranoid mind, this was exactly the kind of strange attack that terrorists had been trying out in other European cities. Neither officer knew what they were looking at, a living symbol of British tradition, a man and horse who had dedicated their lives to serving the Crown and country, and representatives of an institution that had protected British values and people for over 4 centuries. Instead of seeing honor, they saw threats; instead of seeing weapons, they saw ceremony; instead of seeing danger, they saw dedication. Now that the stage was set, there would be a fight that would show how deeply those who serve tradition and those who are supposed to protect it don't understand each other. What happened next at Hyde Park Corner was the kind of communication breakdown that every police training manual warns against but never really prepares officers for in real life. When authority meets tradition, fear meets honor, and assumptions clash with reality, the results can be disastrous in ways that no one sees coming until it's too late to stop them. Imagine this scene happening in slow motion as Trooper Mitchell led Sovereign down the well-known cobblestones of Hyde Park Corner at exactly 2:45 in the afternoon. The sun was setting in the fall, and tourists were taking pictures of the famous Wellington Arch. The usual flow of London traffic was like water flowing around a stone. This was something that had happened thousands of times before without any problems. It was so routine that it was as much a part of London's daily routine as the changing of the guard or the ringing of Big Ben. But today, 2 police officers were about to ruin that routine because they didn't have all the facts, had personal biases, and didn't fully understand what they were seeing. Police Constable Thompson was the first to see them from his spot near the Wellington Arch. What he saw set off every alarm bell in his head right away. A man in what looked like a military dress uniform was riding a huge black horse that was almost 6 feet tall at the shoulder. He was carrying a sword at his side and moving with purpose through one of London's most sensitive areas. To Thompson, who wasn't trained to see these things, this looked exactly like the kind of strange threat that anti-terrorism briefings had been warning about for months. Thompson quickly typed in his radio. "Control, this is Charlie 7. I see a possible code red situation at Hyde Park Corner. A man in military-style clothing on a big black horse, carrying what looks like a knife, is heading toward Apsley House. I need backup and instructions right away." The answer came back in a matter of seconds. "Charlie 7, keep an eye on them, but don't get too close until backup arrives. Treat them as a possible terrorist threat until proven otherwise." But Sergeant Eric Walsh, Thompson's partner, was already taking the kind of decisive action that 24 years of police work had taught him was necessary when dealing with possible threats. Walsh was standing on the other side of Hyde Park Corner, and now he was walking straight toward Mitchell and Sovereign with his hand on his radio and his eyes fixed on what he thought was a clear and present threat to public safety. When Walsh stepped right in front of Sovereign and raised his hand in the Universal Police signal to stop, that was the first time they met. This was the exact moment when everything could have gone differently. If they had been able to identify themselves and talk to each other, the disaster that was about to happen could have been avoided. Instead of taking 30 seconds to really look at what was in front of him, Walsh made the first of many deadly assumptions that would change everything. "Sir, I need you to stop right there and show me some identification," Walsh yelled. His voice had the tone of complete authority that he had used thousands of times before with civilians who had no choice but to obey. Trooper Mitchell did exactly what he had been trained to do after 18 months of the toughest military training in the world. He brought Sovereign to a complete stop, kept his perfect military posture in the saddle, and spoke in the clear, polite tone that had been drilled into him since he joined the service. "Good afternoon, officer. I'm Trooper James Mitchell of His Majesty's King's Guard. I just got back to Wellington Barracks after doing ceremonial duties at Horse Guards Parade." But Walsh wasn't paying attention to what they were saying. He was focused on what he thought was going on, a suspect on horseback with a gun who was now claiming to be in charge of the military. According to Walsh, people in London who were legally allowed to carry guns didn't have to explain themselves to police. They had papers, escorts, and permission ahead of time. They didn't just ride horses around central London and say they were part of the King's Guard. "Anyone can rent a horse and a costume, mate," Walsh said, his voice now full of suspicion that made Sovereign's ears twitch nervously. "I need to see some real identification, and I need you to tell me what you're doing with that gun." This was when PC Thompson got there. He was a little out of breath from running there quickly and immediately saw what he thought was a fight between his partner and someone who might be a threat. Thompson's first impression confirmed everything Walsh had said. This did look like someone playing dress-up in a military costume, riding around London on an expensive horse. They were probably a rich kid with too much money and not enough sense, or even someone who had stolen military equipment for a social media stunt or political protest. "The sword is ceremonial, officer," Mitchell said calmly, his voice still respectful as his training required even when things were hard. "It's part of the official dress uniform of His Majesty's King's Guard. I'm allowed to carry it as part of my official duties. This is Sovereign, an official ceremonial horse of the royal household. We're just going back to the barracks after finishing our duties." Thompson had already made up his mind about what he was seeing, and Mitchell's explanation only made him more sure of what he thought. This person clearly thought they were above the law. They thought that wearing a nice uniform and riding a nice horse gave them rights that regular people didn't have. The way Mitchell sat so straight in the saddle, the way he spoke with that careful military diction, and the way he seemed to expect the police to just believe him when he said who he was and what he was doing all made Thompson's deep-seated anger about class privilege and military arrogance come out. "Listen, mate," Thompson said, getting closer to Sovereign and looking up at Mitchell with barely hidden anger. "I don't care if you think you're the Duke of Wellington himself. In central London, no one carries weapons without permission, and no one rides horses without a permit. So you can either get off that horse right now and show us some real ID, or we can do this the hard way." This was when Sovereign started to show the intelligence and protective instincts that made him one of the royal household's most valuable horses. The beautiful animal could tell that the people around him were getting more and more angry. He could feel the tension in Mitchell's body through the saddle and reins, and he could smell the adrenaline and anger coming from the two police officers. Sovereign had learned how to stay calm in crowds, stand still during gun salutes, and keep his cool even when protesters yelled or cameras flashed, but this time it was different. This wasn't a ceremony or a party, it was a threat assessment, and every instinct Sovereign had told him that his rider was in danger. The strong horse started to show small signs of being alert that only someone with Mitchell's level of experience could understand. Sovereign's ears moved all the time, following the officers' voices and movements. He was able to control his breathing better and more slowly. His huge muscles tensed a little under the ceremonial tack, and he shifted his weight so that he could move quickly in any direction if he needed to. Mitchell could feel these changes right away because he and his horse had been together for so long. He put a calming hand on Sovereign's neck and whispered the quiet words of comfort that had helped them both get through many tough situations. But even as he tried to keep his horse calm, Mitchell was becoming more and more aware that this fight was getting out of hand in ways that his military training had never prepared him for. "Officers," Mitchell said, his voice still polite but now with a sense of urgency, "I understand your concerns, but I need you to know that sudden movements or loud voices may scare my horse. Sovereign is trained for ceremonial duties, but he's also a very large, very powerful animal, who will protect me if he thinks I'm in danger. For everyone's safety, I suggest we handle this calmly and quietly." But Thompson saw Mitchell's warning as the kind of hidden threat that confirmed what he thought about how arrogant the military was. This person was really threatening police officers with his horse. He thought he could scare them off by saying that his animal might get violent. Thompson thought that Mitchell thought he was above the law because he stayed on his horse while talking to police officers on the ground. "Are you threatening us?" Thompson yelled, getting louder and angrier. "Are you really sitting there on your horse threatening police officers?" At that point, Sergeant Walsh made a choice that would change everything. After 24 years of dealing with unstable situations, Walsh decided that they were dealing with someone who was either mentally ill, trying to provoke them, or dangerous. He knew exactly what was going on, a suspect on horseback with a gun who was now making indirect threats about his horse's behavior, standing higher than two officers on foot, in a place where any escalation could put dozens of innocent civilians in danger. "Okay, that's enough," Walsh said as he reached for his radio to call for more help and moved toward Sovereign's bridle at the same time. "Sir, you are under arrest for threatening police officers and carrying an offensive weapon in a public place. You must get off your horse right away and let us search you." But Walsh had never worked with horses before, had never been taught how to approach a 1,700-pound animal that was already on high alert, and didn't know how his aggressive movements and hostile energy would be seen by an animal whose main job was to protect its rider from perceived threats. When Walsh reached for Sovereign's bridle, everything changed. In the next 90 seconds at Hyde Park Corner, parliamentary hearings would look at every frame, experts from 3 different countries would analyze the use of force, and news channels around the world would show it as the perfect example of how a normal police interaction can turn into terrible violence when fear meets misunderstanding and authority meets tradition without wisdom. At exactly 2:57 p.m., Sergeant Derek Walsh made a tactical choice that would haunt him for the rest of his career. When Walsh looked up at Trooper Mitchell sitting perfectly straight in his ceremonial saddle, he decided that they were dealing with someone who was either trying to be provocative or was really dangerous. In his mind, the tactical situation was clear: a suspect on horseback with a gun, higher up than 2 officers, in one of London's most sensitive security areas, with hundreds of civilians nearby who could be in danger if things got worse. "Okay, that's enough games," Walsh said, his voice full of authority that 24 years of police work had taught him was needed when dealing with suspects who wouldn't cooperate. "Sir, you are now under arrest on suspicion of carrying an offensive weapon in a public place and threatening behavior toward police officers. You will dismount that horse immediately, place your hands where we can see them, and submit to a search." But Walsh had never worked with horses before, had never been taught how to approach a 1,700-pound animal that was clearly stressed and acting protectively, and had no idea how his aggressive body language and hostile energy would be seen by an animal whose main job for the past 6 years had been to protect its rider from any perceived threat. Trooper Mitchell did exactly what his protocols said to do because he had been trained for 18 months in the strictest military training in history. "Officer, I respectfully ask that you call Horse Guards Parade to confirm my identity and authority. I am allowed to carry this ceremonial sword as part of my official duties, and I am following the proper steps to return to Wellington Barracks after finishing my ceremonial duties." But PC Connor Thompson had had enough of what he saw as military arrogance and class-based defiance. This was a person who clearly thought that wearing a fancy uniform gave him the right to ignore police authority. He thought he could ride around central London on an expensive horse while carrying weapons and expect regular police officers to just step aside and salute. The way Mitchell spoke to the officers on the ground with respect, the way he sat straight in his saddle while talking to them, and the way he acted like he was in charge all confirmed Thompson's beliefs about privileged military elites who had never faced real consequences for their actions. "Nobody's calling anybody, mate," Thompson said, moving aggressively towards Sovereign's left side as if he thought that the only way to solve the problem was to take physical control right away. "Get off that horse right now, or we'll bring you down ourselves." At this very moment, Sovereign's intelligence and protective instincts turned him from a ceremonial animal into a warrior guardian. The beautiful horse had been trained for 6 years to read people's feelings and intentions by picking up on small changes in their body language, voice tone, and energy patterns. He could tell the difference between the happy energy of crowds celebrating, and the angry energy of possible threats. He could also tell the difference between ceremonial noise and real danger. He could even tell when people were being aggressive by the way they stood and moved long before they acted on that aggression. As PC Thompson moved aggressively towards Sovereign's left flank, Sovereign felt a predatory threat coming from him. Every instinct in his powerful body was programmed to protect him from this kind of behavior. Sovereign's ancestors would have reacted the same way when predators threatened the herd. Thompson's quick approach, tense shoulders, and extended hand reaching for Sovereign's bridle all set off the same protective response. As soon as Thompson's hand touched Sovereign's leather bridle, trying to take control of the horse's head and force it to obey, Sovereign moved to defend himself in the way that centuries of careful breeding had made perfect. The huge horse reared up on his strong hind legs, raising his front hooves 8 feet into the air. His huge body blocked Thompson's path to Mitchell while also making the scary display that has kept predators away from horses for millions of years of evolution. Sovereign's reaction was completely predictable and completely defensive to anyone who knew how horses act. He wasn't attacking, he was defending. He wasn't being mean, he was just protecting his space. He didn't want to hurt anyone, he just wanted to get his rider away from what he thought was a threat. But to the 2 police officers who had never worked with big animals, didn't know anything about horse psychology, and were already assuming they were dealing with a dangerous suspect, Sovereign's rearing looked like the kind of threat that justified using force right away. When PC Thompson suddenly saw a rearing horse weighing 1,700 pounds, he panicked and stumbled back, reaching for his radio to call for backup right away. Sergeant Walsh, on the other hand, had been trained for 24 years to respond to perceived threats with quick action. In a split second, he made a choice that would change everyone's lives forever. Walsh pulled out his taser because he thought an animal that was being used to threaten police officers was out of control, and he wanted to stop it. But in the middle of all the chaos, with Sovereign's hooves flashing in the afternoon sun and Mitchell trying to calm his horse while keeping his own balance in the saddle, Walsh's aim was off and his judgment was dangerously wrong. The taser deployment missed Sovereign completely. The electrical probes hit the horse's ceremonial tack and made sparks that only made the already stressed animal more scared. But PC Thompson made the terrible choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life when he saw his partner use what looked like a weapon, heard the taser's electronic discharge, and saw Sovereign continue to rear defensively. When Thompson was in a panic, he pulled out his standard-issue Glock 17 pistol, which was loaded with hollow-point bullets that are meant to stop human threats. He then shot once at the center mass of the biggest target he could find. The gunshot echoed through Hyde Park Corner like thunder. It was such a shocking and unexpected sound in central London that everyone within 3 blocks stopped what they were doing and turned toward the source. The hollow-point bullet hit Sovereign in the left shoulder just below the joint. It was meant to expand on impact and transfer as much energy as possible to its target. It tore through muscle and sinew, making a wound that started bleeding heavily onto the cobblestones of Hyde Park Corner right away. Thompson didn't expect or want Sovereign to react this way when he was shot. The beautiful horse didn't fall over right away. Instead, it acted on instinct and adrenaline to stay alive. The bullet hit Sovereign and made him lunge forward, and to the side. His strong legs struggled to find traction on the smooth pavement, and blood poured from the wound on his shoulder. The sudden, violent movement caught Mitchell completely off guard. He was still holding onto his horse with his left foot in the stirrup and trying to control it as it panicked. The trooper was pulled from his saddle and dragged alongside Sovereign as the wounded animal tried to find stable footing. People who were at Hyde Park Corner at that moment will never forget what they saw: a beautiful black horse, one of the most important animals in the British royal family, bleeding heavily from a gunshot wound and trying to stay standing on the London pavement. Next to him, a King's Guard soldier in full ceremonial dress, his famous red tunic now stained with blood from his horse, was trying to calm and comfort his injured partner while also dealing with his own injuries from being dragged across the rough cobblestones. When Sovereign was in pain, he didn't make the neigh or whinny that most people think of when they think of horses in trouble. It was a deep, guttural sound of pain and confusion that seemed to come from the very soul of an animal who had never been hurt before, who had been trained for service and ceremony, and who had spent 6 years standing calmly in crowds and keeping his cool in the most difficult situations. Trooper Mitchell, even though he was hurt and had just seen his partner get shot by police, started talking to Sovereign in the calm, steady voice that had helped them both get through many tough times. "Easy, boy. Easy now. You're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. Just breathe, Sovereign. Just breathe with me." But while Mitchell was trying to calm his horse, PC Thompson and Sergeant Walsh were coming in with handcuffs and restraints. They saw the injured trooper as a dangerous suspect who needed to be secured right away. Walsh put his knee on Mitchell's back and pushed him down on the ground, where blood from Sovereign's wound pooled around them both. Then he started putting zip ties around Mitchell's wrists. "You're under arrest for threatening police officers, carrying an offensive weapon, and resisting arrest," Walsh said, his voice shaking with adrenaline and the dawning realization of what had just happened. "You don't have to say anything, but anything you do say could be used as evidence." The crowd reacted right away and with great force. Hundreds of tourists and Londoners who had seen the whole thing started yelling at the police officers, their voices getting louder with anger and disbelief. "They shot the horse. That's a King's Guard horse. Those are ceremonial soldiers. Call ambulance. Someone help that horse." In just a few seconds, dozens of smartphones were recording the scene, capturing images that would be broadcast around the world within minutes. A wounded ceremonial horse trying to stay standing while bleeding onto the historic cobblestones of Hyde Park Corner, and a King's Guard trooper in handcuffs trying to comfort his injured partner while being held back by the same officers who had just shot his horse. But the worst part was when Sovereign, who was weak from blood loss and shock, finally couldn't hold his own weight and fell slowly onto his side on the pavement of Hyde Park Corner. The sound of 1,800 pounds of horse hitting the ground was like a physical blow to everyone who saw it, and the sight of one of Britain's most famous ceremonial animals lying wounded in his own blood would become the defining image of a scandal that would shake the Metropolitan Police to its core. The events that transpired at Hyde Park Corner will be analyzed in police academies for generations as the definitive illustration of how institutional authority can be utterly dismantled when confronted by authentic power, tradition, and the inexorable force of righteous indignation emanating from the apex of the British establishment. When you shoot a horse that belongs to His Majesty the King, attack a soldier who serves the Crown directly, or turn one of London's most sacred ceremonial spaces into a crime scene, you don't just have to answer to the Metropolitan Police or even the Home Secretary. You are bound by 400 years of unbroken tradition, and that tradition has teeth. At exactly 3:07 p.m., just 10 minutes after the gunshot that broke the peace in Hyde Park Corner, PC Connor Thompson and Sergeant Derek Walsh knew they had gotten into something much bigger than they could have imagined. The unique sound of military vehicles, speeding through central London traffic began to echo off the buildings around Wellington Arch. This sound immediately drew the attention of anyone who knew what it meant when the royal household moved with that kind of urgency and purpose. Lieutenant Colonel Victoria Ashworth didn't come in one car, she led a convoy that looked more like a military operation than a routine police response. The Royal Protection Command's armoured Range Rover led the way, followed by 2 military ambulances from the Royal Army Veterinary Corps, a mobile surgical unit that had been flown in from the Royal Veterinary College, and 3 more vehicles carrying Household Division personnel who had been pulled from their duties all over London as soon as Horse Guards heard that Sovereign had been shot. But the woman who got out of the lead car changed the mood at Hyde Park Corner right away. Both police officers knew it right away, even before they knew who she was or what her presence meant for their futures. Lieutenant Colonel Victoria Ashworth was 52 years old and had served in the British Army for 28 years, including 3 combat tours in Afghanistan. The royal household personally chose her to lead the King's troop because she combined absolute military professionalism with the kind of unshakable dignity that could represent the Crown in any situation. Ashworth was only 5 feet 6 inches tall in her perfectly pressed uniform, but she had the kind of presence that made everyone around her know right away that they were in the presence of someone who spoke for institutions that had been protecting British values, since before America was even found. As she walked across the blood-stained pavement of Hyde Park Corner toward the scene where Sovereign lay wounded and Trooper Mitchell was still in police custody, every civilian in the area instinctively stepped back to make room for her. Lieutenant Colonel Ashworth didn't talk to the police officers who caused this disaster first. Instead, he talked to the Royal Army Veterinary Corps team that was already on its way to Sovereign with medical equipment that most civilian veterinarians could only dream of having. Dr. Hartwell, she called to the lead veterinarian, a woman with the rank of Major and 20 years of experience caring for the most valuable horses in the British military. "What's the assessment?" Major Elizabeth Hartwell was already kneeling next to Sovereign, her hands moving quickly and easily like someone who had treated battlefield injuries on military horses while on duty in Iraq and Afghanistan. The bullet hit Sovereign in the left shoulder just below the joint, causing a wound that was bleeding heavily but did not hit any major arteries or bones that could have killed him right away. She said, "The bullet looks like a normal hollow point round, Colonel," while she put pressure bandages on the wound to stop the bleeding. "It's caused a lot of damage to the soft tissue, but the first look shows that there isn't much damage to the shoulder joint itself. We need to get him to a hospital right away for a full evaluation and treatment." "Make it happen," Ashworth said. Within seconds, the mobile surgical unit was parked next to Sovereign, and a group of specialists began the difficult task of stabilizing a 1,800-pound horse for emergency medical care in the middle of one of London's busiest intersections. The royal household's response was very organized and professional, which was very different from how the police officers handled the situation, which was full of confusion and chaos. Lieutenant Colonel Ashworth didn't pay attention to the 2 Metropolitan Police officers standing nearby until she was sure that Sovereign was getting the best medical care possible. At that point, both officers began to realize that they had just gotten themselves into something much more serious than a routine arrest gone wrong. When Ashworth looked at Thompson and Walsh, she didn't look angry or upset. Instead, she had the cold, measured look of a professional soldier judging an enemy who had just shown themselves to be both hostile and incompetent. "Good, gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that had commanded respect in military operations across 3 continents. "I am Lieutenant Colonel Victoria Ashworth, commanding officer of the King's Troop, Royal Horse Artillery, and I am here on direct orders from the royal household, to investigate an incident involving one of His Majesty's horses and one of His Majesty's soldiers. Would either of you care to explain to me why there is a ceremonial horse of the royal household bleeding on the pavement of Hyde Park Corner?" PC Thompson, still thinking that being a Metropolitan Police officer gave him some kind of authority in this situation, made the terrible mistake of responding to Trooper Mitchell in the same way he had before. "Ma'am, we were responding to reports of a suspicious person with a weapon. The suspect didn't follow police orders, and his horse was a danger to public safety. We used the right amount of force to handle the situation." The silence that followed Thompson's explanation lasted exactly 12 seconds. In those 12 seconds, everyone at Hyde Park Corner knew they were watching the moment when the Metropolitan Police and the royal household clashed head-on and found out which one was really more powerful in the UK. "Appropriate force," Lieutenant Colonel Ashworth said again, her voice full of disbelief that would have made anyone who knew how to follow military orders shiver. "You think shooting a ceremonial horse of His Majesty's forces is appropriate force? You think putting a knee to the neck of a King's Guard soldier while he tries to comfort his wounded horse is appropriate force? Sergeant Walsh, PC Thompson, I want you both to understand something very clearly, that horse has served His Majesty longer than you have served anyone. That soldier has gone through more rigorous training and background checks than most cabinet ministers. And both of them have dedicated their lives to protecting the very institutions that give your authority any meaning whatsoever." But Lieutenant Colonel Ashworth was just getting started. What happened next would be shown on news channels all over the world as the worst public verbal dressing down ever given to police officers. "That horse you shot has stood still in pouring rain during state funerals while world leaders paid their respects to British heroes. He has carried members of the royal family through crowds of millions during Jubilee celebrations. He has kept perfect discipline in situations that would break most people, let alone most animals. And you, PC Thompson, thought that this amazing animal was such a threat to public safety that shooting him was the right thing to do." There were now hundreds of people around Hyde Park Corner, and dozens of smartphones were recording every word of Lieutenant Colonel Ashworth's response. The hashtag Justice for Sovereign was already starting to trend around the world on social media. But Ashworth wasn't talking to the crowd or the cameras, he was talking to 2 police officers who were starting to realize that they had just made what could be the worst mistake in Metropolitan Police history. "Trooper Mitchell," she said, now talking to the wounded soldier who was still tied up on the ground next to his injured horse, has been chosen from over 800 applicants to serve in the King's Guard. He has completed 18 months of the most rigorous training in military history. He holds security clearances that most government ministers would kill for. He has ridden in ceremonial duties attended by presidents, prime ministers, and royal families from around the world. And you, Sergeant Walsh, decided that this decorated soldier was such a threat that restraining him face down on the pavement with a knee to his neck was the best way to handle the situation. At this point, vehicles from the Royal Protection Command were arriving on the scene, and armed officers from SO14, the Royal Protection Unit, were taking up positions around the edge of Hyde Park Corner. These were not regular police officers responding to a routine call. They were elite protection specialists who reported directly to the royal household. Their main job was to protect anything and anyone connected to the crown from the same kind of threat that Thompson and Walsh had just shown themselves to be. "Here's what's going to happen now," Lieutenant Colonel Ashworth said, and her voice had the tone of someone who speaks with the full authority of the British Crown. Trooper Mitchell will be released right away and will get medical care for the injuries he got while you were arresting him. Sovereign will get the best veterinary care available anywhere in the world, and His Majesty's veterinary staff will keep an eye on his recovery. You two will also have to explain to investigators from the Royal Military Police, the Metropolitan Police Professional Standards Department, and possibly the Crown Prosecution Service how you turned a normal afternoon into an international incident that has brought shame on British policing. As senior Metropolitan Police commanders and Home Office officials arrived on the scene, more sirens could be heard. These officials had been called in quickly when Whitehall learned that police officers had shot a King's Guard horse. People were starting to understand the political consequences of what had just happened. The sight of royal household staff treating Hyde Park Corner like a crime scene where the criminals were the police was causing a constitutional crisis that would need to be dealt with by the highest levels of government. But the most moving moment may have been when Trooper Mitchell was finally free of his restraints and able to get close to his injured horse. He knelt down next to Sovereign and spoke to him in the calm, steady voice that had comforted the beautiful animal through many difficult times. "Easy, boy," he said softly, stroking Sovereign's neck as the vets worked to stabilize the horse's injuries. "You did well, Sovereign. You did exactly what you were told to do. We'll be fine." At that moment, everyone at Hyde Park Corner knew exactly what two police officers had attacked and broken because they were acting out of bias, fear, and ignorance instead of wisdom, understanding, and respect for the institutions they were sworn to protect. In the 48 hours after the shooting of Sovereign, what happened at Hyde Park Corner would become the most well-documented example of how social media can turn a local event into a global movement for justice. It would also show how the British royal family can use resources and influence that most people don't know about until they see it for themselves. When you attack something that stands for 400 years of unbroken tradition, when you attack the living symbols of everything that makes Britain great, you don't just have to deal with the consequences of your actions in your own area. You have the righteous anger of an entire country against you, and in the digital age, that anger spreads faster than wildfire and burns hotter than anything two police officers could have imagined when they made their terrible choices. The first video went viral on social media at 3:04 p.m., just 7 minutes after PC Connor Thompson's gunshot broke the quiet of Hyde Park Corner in the afternoon. Emma Richardson, a 23-year-old nursing student from Manchester who was in London for the first time, filmed the whole thing on her smartphone while standing less than 30 feet from where Sovereign fell. The video was very clear, the sound was terrible, and the order of events was so shocking that Emma's hands were shaking as she uploaded it to TikTok with the caption that would start a global movement: "Police just shot a King's Guard horse at Hyde Park. This is absolutely horrifying. Share this everywhere." More than 50,000 people had seen Emma's video in just 15 minutes. Within an hour, it had 500,000 views and had been shared on all the major social media sites with hashtags that were already starting to trend around the world: hashtag Justice for Sovereign, hashtag Save the King's Horse, hashtag Police Brutality, hashtag Royal Horse Scandal, and hashtag London Shocking. But Emma's video was just the first of many that would come out and bury any hope Thompson and Walsh had of controlling the story or making the effects of their actions less severe. 17 different views of the event had been posted online by 4 p.m. Thomas Chen, a documentary filmmaker from California, had been filming B-roll footage of famous London sites when he caught the whole fight on camera with professional equipment that showed every detail in high definition. Sarah Williams, a retired teacher from Birmingham, filmed the immediate aftermath, which showed Trooper Mitchell's desperate attempts to comfort his hurt horse while police officers held him back. Michael O'Brien, an Irish journalist who just happened to be walking through Hyde Park Corner, had live-streamed the arrival of Lieutenant Colonel Ashworth and the Royal Household Response Team. More than 200,000 people had watched his live commentary. But the most powerful video might have come from 8-year-old Lucy Peterson, who was in London with her family from Yorkshire. Lucy's mother was filming her daughter feeding pigeons near Wellington Arch when the incident happened. The child's horrified reaction to seeing Sovereign shot and hurt was caught on camera in heartbreaking detail. The most shared audio clip was Lucy's scared voice asking, "Mummy, why did they hurt the pretty horse?" This was because it perfectly captured how millions of people around the world felt as they watched footage of a beautiful ceremonial animal being treated like a common threat. The response from the international media was quick and huge. At 4:30 p.m., the BBC stopped its regular programming to show live coverage from Hyde Park Corner. Correspondent James Harrison said this was potentially the most serious breakdown in police-military relations since the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Sky News sent a helicopter to get aerial footage of the scene, showing the huge response from the royal household, and the crowds of people who were starting to gather with flowers and what looked like horse treats. CNN picked up the story for their international audience. Anderson Cooper, the anchor, called it an incident that strikes at the very heart of British tradition and raises serious questions about police training and oversight. But the responses from unexpected places really showed how much this event affected people all over the world. The Household Cavalry's official social media accounts, which usually posted pictures of ceremonies and historical facts, started posting updates about Sovereign's health that were more closely followed than news about royal babies. The Royal Veterinary College made a special webpage to keep track of Sovereign's recovery with the same level of detail that is usually only given to heads of state. Buckingham Palace, known for its calm and diplomatic responses, even made a statement that was unusually direct and full of emotion. The palace said, "His Majesty is very worried about the health of Sovereign, a horse who has served the Crown well for more than 6 years. His Majesty praises Trooper Mitchell for doing his duty even when it was very hard and for always caring about his horse's well-being even though he was hurt. His Majesty wants a full investigation into this incident and all necessary steps to be taken to make sure it never happens again." What the statement didn't say was just as important as what it did say. There was no diplomatic language about understanding the problems police officers face, no balanced commentary on how complicated the situation was, and no effort to ease tensions or downplay how bad things were. The British royal family made it very clear through official channels that they were unhappy with how Crown representatives had been treated by those who were supposed to protect them. The public reaction was unlike anything Britain had seen since Princess Diana died. Hundreds of people had gathered outside Wellington Barracks by 6 p.m. on the day of the shooting. Many of them were carrying flowers, apples, carrots, and other horse treats. Kids drew pictures of Sovereign with messages like "Get well soon" and "We love you Sovereign" and put them on the gates of the barracks. People brought candles and sang hymns while holding signs that called for justice for both Sovereign and Trooper Mitchell at a vigil that night. Within 6 hours of being made, the online petition calling for the immediate firing of PC Thompson and Sergeant Walsh got 100,000 signatures. It had gotten more than 500,000 signatures by midnight, making it one of the fastest-growing petitions in British history. People from Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and dozens of other countries were also signing the petition. It had somehow become a symbol of standing up against the abuse of power and the disrespect of tradition. But maybe the most important thing that happened was when people on social media started to look up the backgrounds of the 2 police officers who were involved in the incident. Within hours, Thompson's social media history had been thoroughly examined, revealing posts that showed a pattern of antagonism toward military personnel and dismissive comments about royal traditions. Walsh's disciplinary record with the Metropolitan Police had been leaked. It showed that he had received many complaints about using too much force and had a history of being confrontational, that his bosses had always ignored. When it came out that both officers had histories that should have predicted this kind of incident, it made people even angrier and raised serious questions about how the Metropolitan Police hires, trains, and watches over its officers. How did Thompson get sent to central London when his own social media posts showed that he was clearly biased against the military? How was Walsh still on active duty when his record showed a pattern of getting into more and more trouble with civilians? As the story spread around the world, support from celebrities started to pour in. Dame Judi Dench posted a picture of herself with horses from her own stable on Instagram and wrote, "Thoughts and prayers for Sovereign's quick recovery. This beautiful animal deserves our respect, not our violence." Sir Patrick Stewart shared the original video with the comment, "This is not who we are as a nation. We are better than this." Even American celebrities who had nothing to do with British traditions were speaking out, with Oprah Winfrey posting, "When we see injustice, we must speak. When we see tradition attacked, we must defend it." Praying for Sovereign's recovery. As tourism groups reported that international tourists were cancelling their trips to London right away because they were shocked by the pictures of police officers shooting a ceremonial horse, the financial effects of the incident began to become clear. The British Tourism Authority thought that if images of police brutality against the very symbols that tourists came to see hurt Britain's reputation as a safe, civilised place to visit, it could cost London tens of millions of pounds in lost revenue. But the most telling response may have come from current and former military personnel from all over the world. As soldiers, sailors, and airmen from many countries posted pictures of themselves with military animals, horses, dogs, and other creatures that work with people, the hashtag I stand with Sovereign started to trend. The message was clear: hurting one military animal hurt the bond between all service members and the animals that work with them. By midnight on the day of the shooting, it was clear that PC Connor Thompson and Sergeant Derek Walsh had done more than just cause a problem with the police in the area. They had caused an international scandal that could hurt Britain's reputation, make people lose faith in the Metropolitan Police, and make the police rethink how they train officers to deal with military personnel and cultural differences. The shooting of Sovereign had become a symbol of everything that can go wrong when power is not wise, when authority meets ignorance, and when those who are supposed to protect and serve forget that respect cannot be demanded but must be earned through understanding, restraint, and recognition of the values that make civilization possible. Now we get to the part of the story that will stick with you long after you've seen it. What happened in the weeks after the shooting of Sovereign at Hyde Park Corner showed us things about justice, tradition, and human nature that go much deeper than just one incident between two police officers and a ceremonial horse. This is the part where we learn that the most important lessons don't always come from the disaster itself, but from how a country reacts when its most important values are attacked by the people who were supposed to protect them. 6 weeks after PC Connor Thompson shot Sovereign in the shoulder, the beautiful horse was back in the courtyard of Wellington Barracks, ready to do his ceremonial duties. His wound had healed completely, and his spirit was still strong. But Sovereign was not the same horse that had fallen on the cobblestones of Hyde Park Corner and bled. Trooper James Mitchell was the only one who could fully understand how the experience had changed him. Those changes would teach everyone involved lessons about how to be strong, forgive, and what service really means that no training manual could ever fully explain. The first sign that Sovereign had changed a lot because of what he went through was during his first veterinary checkup to see if he could go back to work. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the major in the Royal Army Veterinary Corps who treated his gunshot wound, saw that Sovereign was more aware of his surroundings than he had been during his ceremonial training. The horse that had once stood still during gun salutes now followed every movement of the people around him with a level of focus that made it seem like he was always on the lookout for possible threats. His ears moved around all the time, his breathing stayed steady but alert, and his strong muscles stayed slightly tense, which showed that he was always ready to protect his rider. Sovereign had become even more amazing than he had been before, even though his traumatic experience had hurt him. Mitchell found out that his horse could now read people's thoughts and feelings in a way that seemed almost magical. Sovereign could tell the difference between real authority and fake bravado, between a respectful approach and a hostile one, and between ceremonial noise and real danger. The horse that police shot because they were scared of what they didn't understand had learned how to tell the difference between people who were trustworthy and people who were dangerous. Trooper Mitchell's change was just as deep and maybe even more helpful for anyone who wants to know what real strength looks like under pressure. The young soldier who had been pulled off his horse and held down with a knee to his neck while his horse bled next to him did not come out of the experience bitter or angry. Instead, he came out with a better understanding of his duty to teach others about the traditions he represented. Mitchell had become an unofficial ambassador for military-civilian relations, giving talks at police training academies about how important it is to know the context before acting. The legal consequences for PC Thompson and Sergeant Walsh happened with the same unyielding accuracy as British justice when it is driven by strong evidence and public anger. Thompson was found guilty of hurting animals, firing a gun carelessly in a public place, and attacking military personnel while they were doing their jobs. His sentence of 18 months in prison and permanent dismissal from the Metropolitan Police made it clear that being ignorant or prejudiced was not a good reason to hurt people who serve the Crown and the country. Sergeant Walsh, who had served for 24 years but had not properly assessed the situation at Hyde Park Corner, was given a suspended sentence and told he had to retire from the police force. The judge's words during sentencing became part of legal precedent: experience without wisdom is not just useless, it is dangerous. Authority without understanding is not just ineffective, it is destructive. The Metropolitan Police must learn that protecting the public requires protecting the institutions and individuals who serve the public, not attacking them. The most important thing that came out of the whole thing, though, was the thorough review of police training that came out of the parliamentary inquiry into what became known as the Hyde Park Corner incident. Now, all police officers in the UK would have to learn how to recognise military ceremonial functions, know the legal status of ceremonial weapons and animals, and calm down situations involving military personnel. There would be specific modules in the curriculum about British military traditions, the duties of ceremonial units, and the legal protections that are given to people who serve the Crown. The way the world reacted to the incident showed something deep about how people saw Britain and its customs. Messages of support for Sovereign and Mitchell came in from military units all over the Commonwealth, horse lovers all over the world, and regular people who knew that an attack on tradition was an attack on the values that make civilization possible. The hashtag Stand with Sovereign had become a rallying cry not only for justice in this case but also for the idea that people who dedicate their lives to serving others should be protected from those they serve. The Metropolitan Police had to pay a lot of money for Sovereign's medical care and Mitchell's injuries, but the real cost to the police was losing the public's trust and damaging their reputation. Polls showed that people had less faith in the Metropolitan Police's ability to make good decisions than ever before, and recruitment to the force had dropped sharply as potential officers wondered if they wanted to work for an organization that had been seen on international television shooting ceremonial horses. Sovereign himself, who was not expected to be the source of the most important lesson from the whole thing, was the one who taught it. 3 months after the shooting, the beautiful horse returned to full ceremonial duties. His behavior showed a level of forgiveness and dedication that humbled everyone who saw it. Even though police officers shot him, Sovereign didn't show any fear or aggression toward people in uniform. He still completely trusted Mitchell, he still did his ceremonial duties without fail, and he still kept his dignity under pressure, which inspired everyone who knew what real courage looks like. But when Sovereign went back to work, it showed me something even deeper about what it means to serve and forgive. Sovereign met Metropolitan Police officers who were providing security for the state opening of Parliament, his first major ceremonial appearance after the shooting. The horse didn't show fear or aggression, instead, he kept his perfect ceremonial posture and showed the kind of professional restraint that the officers who shot him didn't. Sovereign's actions taught everyone how real professionals act under pressure, with honor, discipline, and a strong sense of duty, even when others don't live up to those standards. The deeper meaning of Sovereign's story went far beyond what happened at Hyde Park Corner. In a time when people often question authority, traditions, and the ties between those who serve and those who are served, the relationship between Mitchell and Sovereign showed what a real partnership looks like. Their relationship was not based on one person being in charge and the other person following orders. Instead, it was based on respect for each other, a shared goal, and a strong commitment to doing their best no matter what. The event also brought to light uncomfortable truths about class, bias, and assumptions in modern Britain. PC Thompson's past and activity on social media showed that he was angry about what he saw as military privilege and aristocratic entitlement. He didn't realize that real military service requires sacrifice, discipline, and dedication no matter what your social background is. This is why he attacked the people whose service protected his right to hold and express his prejudices. Everyone could see the irony. Thompson had used the power given to him by a system that soldiers like Mitchell protected to attack the soldiers who protected that system. The tale of Sovereign and Mitchell ultimately morphed into a parable about the distinction between earned authority and assumed authority, between service and self-service, and between protection and aggression. People who really serve earn respect by how they act, how dedicated they are, and how willing they are to put others before themselves. People who take charge without earning it through service will always have their authority questioned, challenged, and finally taken away when they abuse it. As I finish this amazing story, I want you to think about the last time you saw someone really serve, really dedicate themselves, and really commit to something bigger than their own interests. If we know how to see and appreciate it, we can see real service all around us. For example, a soldier standing guard in the rain, a nurse working double shift to save lives, a teacher staying late to help students who are having trouble, or a police officer who takes the time to understand before taking action. Sovereign and Mitchell went back to work stronger, smarter, and more determined than ever to show the best of British values. Their story teaches us that real strength doesn't come from being able to hurt others but from being able to protect them even when they don't want to. True bravery is not being afraid but being willing to do the right thing even when you're scared, facing opposition, or being misunderstood. If this story has touched you, made you remember why respect must be earned and not demanded, and shown you the difference between real service and empty authority, then share it with others who need to learn these lessons. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. In a world where the loudest voice often gets the most attention, we all need to be reminded that true strength whispers, true service lasts, and true justice, when it finally comes, thunders with the voice of a whole nation standing up for its most sacred values.